World Service. We're a weekly program. Our job is to add in-depth analysis to one question from the news. We hope you like it.
BBC World Service. This is Helena Merriman with The Inquiry. This week, is Pakistan serious about tackling militants? On Tuesday the 16th of December, 9 gunmen entered the army-run school in Peshawar and headed straight for the auditorium. Over the next few hours, they killed more than 130 children. There was no doubt over who carried out the attack. In an email, the Pakistan Taliban, the TTP, said they did it to avenge the deaths of children allegedly killed by soldiers in tribal areas. The next day, the Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, made an announcement.
आज हमारी कौमी क़यादत ने अज़्म और इस्तिक़लाल के इसी अहद को
We have resolved to continue the war against terrorism till the last terrorist is eliminated, he said. But there have been similar pledges before. So in this week's inquiry, we want to know, is Pakistan serious about eliminating militants? All its militants.
Part 1. Snakes in the backyard.
You know, it's like that old story. You can't keep snakes in your backyard and expect them only to bite your neighbors. You know, eventually those snakes are going to turn on whoever has them in the backyard.
That's Hillary Clinton speaking at a press conference in Islamabad 3 years ago. It was a warning about the consequences of the double game that Pakistan has played with militants, fighting some while allegedly supporting others. So to find out whether Pakistan is now serious about tackling militants, we're going to start by looking at who those militants are and how Pakistan has dealt with them in the past. Here's our first expert witness.
Pakistan's perennial fare ever since its creation has been that there could be a pincer movement from both Afghanistan and India in unison. And that, I think, is a strategic nightmare that Pakistani armed forces and the civilian leadership have tried to avoid all these years.
This is Aisha Jalal, a historian who spoke to us from Lahore. Perhaps the best way to understand the nightmare she describes is by looking at a map of Pakistan. To the northwest, across a border that's over 2,000 kilometres long, lies Afghanistan. But it's to the east, across a 3,000-kilometre long border, where many Pakistanis feel a greater threat. India has a clear military, economic and demographic advantage over Pakistan. Aisha Jalal says it's this fear of India, above all, that's shaped Pakistan's policy towards militants.
Pakistan emerged out of India. There's a long history of tension, not to mention the way in which partition took place, the violence that occurred, the fact that the Kashmir problem remains unresolved, and the Kashmir problem is not just about territory, it is intrinsically related to water issues, which are strategically important for Pakistan as an agricultural country. And of course, there's the human aspect of it. I mean, there are people who are of Kashmiri descent who live in this country who feel that the Kashmiris are being oppressed. So there's been a long history of that, which results in this fear of India and its desire to assert its hegemonic imprint on South Asia, which Pakistan wants to basically resist.
To bolster its precarious position in the region, Pakistan adopted a policy called strategic depth, forming a close alliance with the Taliban in Afghanistan to weaken India's influence there.
The contested border with Afghanistan and uncertainties on Kashmir have fueled this notion that Pakistan needs strategic depth, or at least a government or a group in Kabul that will support Pakistan and not be completely India's agents. If you look at the policy towards Afghanistan, which began, of course, with the effort to dislodge the Soviets, subsequently it morphed into an effort to form a government that was pro-Pakistan. Pakistan, since 1996, it helped the Taliban regime come into power and continued to support the Taliban overtly until 2001, after which that relationship was supposed to have crumbled. But all the evidence suggested that they continued to provide support.
So, As long as militants were helping Pakistan fulfil its regional ambitions, making trouble in India or Afghanistan, Pakistan's military didn't go after them. The real trouble for Pakistan came when militants turned their guns on Pakistanis. In 2007, the military conducted an operation that became a rallying point for Pakistan's militants. Codenamed Operation Sunrise, armed troops stormed the Red Mosque in Islamabad, which had been taken over by radical clerics trying to impose Sharia law. There had been frequent skirmishes between those in the mosque and the authorities. But the real trouble began when the clerics said
that a Chinese-run parlour was in fact a prostitution den. And they went and they kidnapped some of the Chinese personnel working at the parlour, at which point the Chinese government was enraged. And so to avoid a diplomatic incident, the government finally woke up and intervened. There was a standoff, and the whole country was glued into what was really a reality show. It was blow-by-blow coverage by the media, an attempt, first of all, to get the brothers to surrender. But once they didn't, then the army was called in, and people died. Lots of people died.
It was in the shadow of these deaths that the TTP, the Pakistan Taliban, was formed, the same group which attacked the school in Peshawar. The leaders of the group are now thought to be hiding in Afghanistan.
It's a complex game. I mean, Pakistan has been an extraordinarily complex country since the war against the Soviets. Don't forget, this is a 30-year policy that Pakistan has pursued, so there can't be an instantaneous turnaround. It has to be a long-standing war.
So, to sum up, in Pakistan now there are dozens of militant groups. Some tolerated, some supported, some fought against, and some which have gone through all those permutations. Aisha Jalal says that if the government is serious, it will not only go after those militants who attack Pakistanis, it will also go after those making trouble for India and Afghanistan. After the attack on the school, Pakistan's Prime Minister, Nawaz Sharif, said that's exactly what he would do.
हम इस बात का भी वाज़े ऐलान करते हैं कि अच्छे और बुरे तालिबान की कोई तमीज़ किसी सतह पर.
There will be no differentiation between good and bad Taliban, he said. So, to answer our original question, whether the government is serious about tackling militants, let's look at what the government's done since the attack on the school.
Part 2. Promises, Promises.
In Pakistan, we are fighting terrorism in all its dimensions.
Pakistan's leaders have promised before to crack down on militants.
Our war on terror is progressing well, and we are slowly, gradually ensuring
Pakistan has a resolve and has a commitment to fight against extremism and terrorism.
We are winning the battle against terrorism.
So, will anything be different this time? Meet our second expert witness.
I'm close to the action, and I have personally known all these Pakistani leaders, Pakistani Taliban leaders.
This is Rahimullah Yousafzai. He's a journalist based in Peshawar. He's been involved in negotiations with militants in the past. He's even interviewed Osama bin Laden.
I must tell you that the mood has decisively turned against the militants. Now everybody wants action, and they are pushing the government. The common people, the public opinion is setting the agenda now.
In the past, efforts to tackle militants have been hampered by divisions between the military and Pakistan's civilian leaders. But Rahimullah Yousafzai says that in recent months there's been more coordination.
A real effort was made to bring all the political parties and the military leadership on one page. That's why, they will make efforts to stop the funding to the militants. They will seize all the hate material which is openly published and sold in Pakistan. They will also try to control the media, giving publicity to the militants.
So do you think that this shows that Pakistan's politicians and the military are taking the threat of militants more seriously than before?
I think they are, and they have to. They have no choice.
The government has already had some success. In early January, 5 members of the Pakistan Taliban were arrested in Afghanistan. Even before the attack on the school, the army had been pushing them out of North Waziristan. But going after the Pakistan Taliban is to be expected. The real test of the government's resolve is whether it will also go after those militants it once allegedly supported. Will the ISI, Pakistan's powerful military intelligence agency, really give up assets who have been useful to the country in the past?
That remains to be seen. The first priority for Pakistan would be to go after all these Pakistani Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, Chinese separatists from the ETIM. That is the first priority. The second priority, I think, is the Haqqani network, and then finally Afghan Taliban leadership, and also the India-focused militants. They can't go after every group at the same time. They will have their own priorities.
And he says the momentum is now with those who want change.
Even if there was some reluctance, I think now it's widely being said that we should not allow any armed group. We should not support any armed group, whether in Pakistan or abroad. That seems to be the dominant feeling now. I think that may push the Pakistani army and ISI to change their policy.
They'd need to change their policy because Pakistan can only arrest members of the Pakistan Taliban with the help of Afghanistan, since that's where its leaders are hiding. But there's a catch.
Pakistan would want the Afghan government and also NATO to take action against the Pakistani Taliban, who are actually able to find refuge in Afghanistan since 2009. And then the Afghan government would have similar expectations from Pakistan.
It's quid pro quo. You help me get rid of my militants hiding in your backyard, and I'll help you get rid of your militants in my backyard. Is such a deal likely? Here's our third expert witness.
Part 3. The Army and the Neighbours.
I'm Shaukat Qadir. I'm a former soldier from the Pakistan Army. I started my career...
Shaukat Qadir began his career in the Air Force. His stunts in the sky didn't earn him many favours, so he left for the Army, where he spent many years in the tribal areas. He left, having reached the rank of brigadier, later founding a think tank.
The Pakistan military is responsible, at least in part, for creating these people. That's quite true. The military has been responsible for creating these monsters and have been unable to tame them. I never realized initially that this was going to go that far.
He says there's been a change of policy in the army.
What has changed recently is the leadership. I think that's very important to understand.
General Raheel Sharif took command of the Pakistan Army a year ago. The day after the Peshawar attack, he went to Afghanistan looking for help.
This was the first time that the Pakistan Army chief went to Kabul, and he was telling the Americans and the Afghanis to do more instead of the other way around. Apparently he had evidence which he carried along because the ISI chief went along with him. I think they've agreed upon something like simultaneous operations, and they've agreed on shared intelligence, and I think both sides have agreed that their soil will not be used against each other.
So Shaukat Qadir is encouraged by this new level of cooperation with Afghanistan. But when I ask him whether Pakistan will really go after anti-Indian militants, he gives a revealing answer.
Pakistan and India have been doing this to each other for as long as you can recall our history. Unfortunately, what the media picks up are Indian accusations. They never pick up ours. Perhaps we've never been able to sell them as well as the Indians do. Perhaps their media policy is better. Perhaps you people like the sexy, attractive India, which Pakistan is not. We're the more sober and very hospitable, but not very lively face. We're not sort of living, we're not dancing and singing all the time, and like the Indians seem to be doing in their movies. Perhaps we don't sell ourselves that well. This is a two-sided war. Both of us need to give up. No country can be an island of peace if it is in a sea which is raging. I think everybody realizes this fact. But what they don't realize is their policy towards the other only rebounds on them as well.
In other words, Pakistan is unlikely to turn on anti-Indian militants until its relationship with India improves. With recent clashes on the border, this looks doubtful. But even if the relationship between India's and Pakistan's leaders were to improve, getting the public on side in a crackdown against anti-Indian militants would be hard.
Part 4. Snakes on the Punjabi plain.
It's a very slow-moving process as I look at it.
This is Aisha Siddiqa. She comes from the Punjab in the east, and she studied both the military and militants in Pakistan. She says although the government might be going after the Pakistan Taliban, she's not seen any sign that they're going after militants elsewhere.
When the whole thing started after Peshawar attacks, I was very sceptical because you saw nothing had moved. I mean, so far, nobody has been arrested in South Punjab. And there you see militants roaming around, operating freely.
Militants may be roaming around, operating freely, as she says, but the government has banned one group based in the Punjab, which is alleged to have been involved in the 2008 attack on the Indian city of Mumbai. But groups have been banned before. Aisha Siddiqa says the government needs to take real action.
Now, how are they going to tackle them? I mean, is it possible to disempower them and gradually phase them out? Would there be a reorientation for them? Will their thinking be reformatted? Because until that happens, we are sitting with these elements amongst us.
She says the problem is that those militants have sympathisers amongst ordinary Pakistanis. She said she only realised the extent of this a few years ago when she went back to her home village, intending to write a book about Sufism.
I kept bumping into one militant and the other. I stepped out of my village, went to the village next door and saw graves of young men who had fought in Afghanistan. The mothers would proudly be showing their photographs. You walk to another village next door and you find that there are boys who are caught in Indian Kashmir. And the mothers are wailing because they had imagined their sons being martyred and going to heaven, but not the fact that they would be caught. And the thought of them being tortured was very painful to them. So there what I saw was that the society around me had changed in so many ways. The sweetness had somehow depleted. You go around in Punjab and you'll find trader merchants, the business community contributing to militant outfits. That's very interesting. So militancy or radicalism is no longer just a poor man's project. It's actually the middle class project. And these people are also partly educated.
In a poll carried out by Gallup Pakistan a week after the attack on the school, almost half of those surveyed said they thought India posed a greater threat to the country than the Taliban.
I think there is a problem because Pakistan continues to be India-centric. Pakistan's policy, the new army chief, they're still very India-centric. And if you are suspicious of India, you would probably hang on to the tool that you've created in many years to fight India, which is these militant proxies.
What would be the proof for you that the government is serious about tackling militants?
The one proof will be if we see these organizations in Punjab being wrapped up and not allowed to operate. But we will know when you see them being eliminated from social media, when you see them not being allowed to do their welfare work, when their headquarters will be cleaned up, we would know that something is happening.
So we've heard why Pakistan's leaders may not go after all militants. But perhaps we should also ask, what would happen if they did? What would happen if they were to crack down on those anti-Indian militants that they've tolerated in the past?
Well, if you begin to stop them, then they will start killing. They're trained militants, so they will try to attack. I mean, so far, these are militants who have cooperated with the state. But how far would they allow the government to go in disbanding them? That's a big question.
And here's the nub of it. If As a government, you follow a policy where you distinguish between good and bad militants. What's to stop the good militants going bad, turning their guns on you?
Pakistan is a bit, careful, because the worry is that the Afghan Taliban would join hands with Pakistani Taliban and further destabilize Pakistan.
And do you think that's a real possibility?
I think in the long run, yes. If Pakistan, takes tough action against the Afghan Taliban, then as a reaction, they may do that.
But there's a second possible outcome, one that arguably worries Pakistan's leaders more. It's that pincer movement described by our first expert witness. With its militant proxies along those troubled borders, Pakistan's leaders felt more secure. Without them, they could feel exposed. But retired Brigadier Shaukat Qadir says Pakistan may have to accept a new, diminished role in the region.
The influence that they had in Afghanistan is gone. No, this is a different ballgame altogether. I think the Pakistanis are fully aware of, at least in Afghanistan, even if India, they're not fully aware. In Afghanistan, I think they're fully aware. It has to change. Afghanistan will take its own course. We can only help them.
There's a real concern in Pakistan, especially in the government circles, that India has gained a lot of influence at Pakistan's expense in Afghanistan. Right now, also in Kabul, the feeling is that Pakistan is now in need of Afghanistan's support. In the past, they thought that Pakistan has a dominant role and they need Pakistan's blessings and support. That seems to be changing now. Pakistan is in real trouble,
So in answer to our question, is Pakistan serious about tackling militants? The answer depends on which of the many hundreds of thousands of people with guns you're talking about. The military can't go after all of them at once. What's clear is that the government is serious about tackling the Pakistan Taliban, the group which attacked the school in Peshawar. And they may go after militants causing trouble in Afghanistan. But we've heard that it's unlikely that the government will go after anti-Indian militants. Even if Pakistan's leaders wanted to do it, it's doubtful that they would get the consensus from the public to turn on them.
Anybody who has any sense or understanding of Pakistan will see that what's going on here is a serious political battle.
The Inquiry is produced in London by Simon Mabin and me, Neil Rizal. The researcher is Phoebe Keane. Next week, we turn to North Korea and ask, what does Kim Jong-un want? Meanwhile, we want to know what you want to know. So, demand an inquiry. Contact us via the BBC World Service Facebook page or message us on Twitter at BBC The Inquiry. Hi, thanks for downloading The Inquiry from the